Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 86 and I'm the show's host Kyle. In today's show I'm going to be talking about North Korea's latest missile test. Of course, this is a missile test that went over Japan and is causing a whole bunch of new responses, rhetoric, and threats that I want to cover. So if this is a subject that you or other people you know would be interested in, please think about sharing the show. You can find the show at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or at the Facebook page Kyle's Files. Files is spelled F-Y-L-E-S. A few things I want to touch on the home front before we get to the North Korea situation. The first is a very interesting story, I think, just on a political level, and that is we have Donald Trump responding to Laura Ingraham on Fox and Friends. I guess Laura Ingraham was on Fox and Friends and was talking about how the unfilled positions in Trump's White House and all kinds of other pits are kind of hampering his ability to lead the country. Trump responded in a tweet by saying that the White House, that they were intentionally leaving some of these positions empty because they didn't need them, and this was a way to keep government smaller. On the first note, it's just, I can't believe Trump actually watches these morning shows every morning, and I hope he doesn't, take them as news, and it's more just him trying to gather info, maybe how the country feels about him. But man, if he could be doing anything else with his time, it would be so much more beneficial. He obviously has a very little understanding of the North Korea or Middle East situation, just by what his current view of the situation in Afghanistan is, and the fact that he thinks sending a few more troops over there is going to do anything but continue to just leave America in this prolonged war. And so that I find is kind of interesting. Also, again, how he has to respond to any criticism. I mean, this was Laura Ingraham, and it wasn't necessarily criticism. But I think it's very interesting that rather than maybe announcing anything later on or doing that, like Trump immediately takes to Twitter to respond to what someone is saying on Fox and Friends. And also a lot of the positions that are unfilled, there are a lot of diplomatic posts unfilled, overall ambassadors that are not put in place. And so this, in a way, is kind of scary and disturbing. It seems that the people around Trump, his, quote unquote generals, have a very establishment view, the same view of the Middle East and foreign policy and just international affairs, very interventionist, therefore a humanitarian or interest excuse. Either way, that is a very consensus view. And Trump not putting people in these positions are just going to make it more likely that, that's the only view he's ever going to hear on any of these issues. One of the interesting things about the Afghanistan situation, I guess what made Trump very hesitant on the situation is when he had talked to not necessarily generals, but just people who serve on the ground in Afghanistan. And it was reported that they told him that the situation was unwinnable and kind of pointless, and that, I don't know if they recommended withdrawal, but definitely were suggesting that a troop increase wasn't going to solve any problem. Trump apparently took this information very seriously, and at one point was even yelling at H.R. McMaster over his failure to produce a Afghanistan plan that wouldn't create this end result. That result, of course, being for continued U.S. troop loss and no win in Afghanistan. And so I think, if we maybe have more of these ambassadors in place and they talk to Donald Trump about what the situation is like in these countries, maybe that this gives him different points of view. It seemed that with Obama, when he carried out his surge in Afghanistan, while it was completely wrong and completely his fault, and we should absolutely shame and denounce Obama for agreeing to send 100,000 American lives over to Afghanistan to win an endless and pointless war, which America, of course, can't win. But, he was really had to be almost blackmailed by Petraeus and others in the administration. I think Robert Gates was another one who kind of threatened to resign their post and say, denounce Obama over his unwanting to do this surge. It doesn't seem they necessarily had that problem with Trump where they had to blackmail him. They could just influence him. And so, there's advantage and a disadvantage to that, I guess. If you could put other people in front of him, then maybe we could win one of these things. Where Obama, just the way the establishment, the kind of deep state idea that's set up in Washington, the lobbyists, the congressmen, the diplomats, and the government officials who are in power from administration to administration, the think tanks that all want you to believe this certain view that continues to land America in international interventions that they cannot possibly win, like Syria, like Yemen, like Libya, like Iraq, and all these, every single one of them ends up worse for the American people. And so while it's certainly a negative that Trump could be convinced of that position, it's a positive that I think that if he believed, this was the case and was able to understand or maybe read Scott Horton's book, then he may well just, withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. He doesn't seem like the type of person that's going to care a whole lot about, what saving face or anything like that, as long as, he thinks he's doing what the right thing to do is. And so that's just a little insight into that story. Trump said the U.S. will continue to be very, very protective of the Baltics. What's going on right now is, I guess, China and Russia are holding a major war games and stuff in the Baltic Sea. Of course, America holds these war games over time, and anytime Russia complains about it, we say, no, shut up. And if Russia decides to put more troops in West Russia because the United States and NATO allies are conducting war games on, that border with Russia, we call it Russian aggression. But right now we have, the UK moving additional planes into Estonia and the NATO putting more troops in Estonia, and that's just called being protective of the Baltics and not aggression on NATO's part. Nobody ever refers to it as NATO aggression. Here again, I think we have Trump being persuaded of a losing argument that is NATO expansion and isolation and trying to surround Russia is a good policy. That's a policy that in the long run will do something other than bankrupt the United States and somehow provide protection to the United States by making an enemy out of a potential ally. Other impacts of this are just going to further drive any sort of wedge in between the U.S. and Russia that, the countries are moving so far apart. Trump has also committed to Obama's nuclear plan. I talked about this in previous episodes. This is Obama's $1 trillion plan to kind of bolster America's nuclear weapons capabilities. I've discussed Con Hallinan's kind of concern that the United States is moving very close to having first strike capabilities against Russia. This is because the United States is able to conduct more accurate nuclear weapon strikes, which would allow the United States to use smaller bombs to destroy Russia's nuclear weapons arsenal. And so the rest of this $1 trillion upgrade is going to upgrade America's missiles. It's going to upgrade the submarines. And I think there's a few more components, shortening the fuse and like I said, making them more accurate. And so a couple things to watch for is that these things always run way over budget. And this one was, I think, given out to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Of course, Lockheed Martin's the one that got the F-35 contract. And the costs of that fighter jet have absolutely ballooned out of proportion, so I don't know why we wouldn't expect the same thing to come out of this nuclear program. So rather than costing $1 trillion, we could see $2 or more trillion end up being spent here, and overall could just be a huge suck on the American economy. Also, the United States moving closer or achieving first strike capability would make the president's finger a little looser when it comes to hitting the button. And then also, whoever is Russia's president would have the same concern because from a Russia perspective, then if you don't launch first, you definitely lose. And so that creates a problem as well. And, overall, just spending more money on these weapons that all they could do is genocide the human race. They could absolutely wipe out their weapons of extinction. The most stupid thing that the human race has ever done probably is develop these nuclear weapons. And at best, they will just end up destroying the environment as they decay over, a few thousand or a few 100,000 years, however long all these weapons and rods and material used to create them will have taken up. And, at worst, they kill every single human being on the planet and absolutely destroy the place. Quick story about Russia, and that is an Islamic State terrorist ended up killing apparently one police officer in Russia in a terror attack. This was in the southern area of Russia where there's a fairly large Muslim population, and so I don't think these terror attacks are too out of the ordinary, but I think it's important to point these out when they occur in Russia. I think from an American perspective, a lot of times the terror attacks only occur in the West, or this is our belief, and that's because the United States, I think, is the one kind of seen as doing the dirty work. And also the whole they hate us for our freedoms narrative holds up that way. But if we see the attacks occurring in Russia, then we, may understand that this is occurring for a different reason. Russia, like the United States, has been meddling in the Middle East for many, many years. And if, you go back to the Soviet Union, absolutely decades that Russia was trying to, gain a stranglehold on the Middle East. I guess it would have been the USSR back then, but you know what I mean. And also just understanding that there may be a Russian demand to be more involved in Syria, and that's not necessarily because of the United States. Just like anytime there's a terror attack in the United States, we will get at least some portion of the United States, it could be left-wing Hillary Clintonites, or it could be right-wing, just kind of right-wing nationalist types who want to defend America at all costs will start shouting that we need more airstrikes in Syria. And that has absolutely nothing to do with Russia, right? This isn't because Russia is doing anything different or because we want to hold Russia back in Syria. It's an emotional response to the terror attack. And just, keep that in mind if we see any reporting in the coming days that Russia is carrying out more airstrikes against ISIS or something like that. Now into the North Korea stuff. We have North Korea tests launching a ballistic missile over Japan. I believe this was an intermediate range ballistic missile, not intercontinental ballistic missile. I would assume that would mean that the missile couldn't carry itself all the way to the United States west coast. I don't know if it could have hit Guam. Obviously it had the range to hit Japan since it flew over northern Japan. A couple things about the missile test, questions I have just, overall. And one is that if North Korea wanted to test a missile, this far, was there another path, or was this the least restrictive path it could take? Maybe there was no way to test launch this missile, that distance without going over some foreign landmass, whether it be Russia, China, South Korea, or Japan. And so this was the way they were able to launch it, where they could test the missile, and if it failed, it had the least likely chance of killing anybody. But, that may not have been the case. I'm not saying that's a fact. I'm just saying that's a question I have that I haven't been able to get answered. I believe this missile did have the range to hit Guam. At least that's what I saw in a few of the news stories. Now, if it had the accuracy or actual ability to hit Guam with any kind of warhead is a different story. I guess they could conduct the missile test without any actual explosive in the cap of the missile. And those explosives are typically very heavy. And so if you're going to slap a nuclear bomb on it, or, even just a lot of explosives to blow something up, it's going to weigh hundreds of pounds, and so that changes an awful lot of stuff. But it does seem to be North Korea's boldest missile test, at least since the test of the intercontinental ballistic missiles. But since this test actually went over Japan, I think for that reason it was a little more bold. On the last show, I had talked about how North Korea had failed 3, missile tests over the weekend. And so it could have been that North Korea was looking to carry these tests out over the weekend. They're just trying something new and fancy, and the tests were failing for that reason. But there's an awful lot going on in the kingdom that we don't understand. And so I'm not exactly sure, what all is going on in North Korea, but this does seem to be a bit more of a hostile stance from them. The United States and South Korea are, of course, either wrapping up or conducting some war games right now with a simulation of the invasion of North Korea, I believe is what they're doing this time. And those kind of events always bring some kind of reaction out of North Korea. I'm not justifying what Kim Jong-un did here. I think it's stupid. I think it's reckless. And I really wish he didn't do it. That way maybe we could have some peace one day between the United States and North Korea. But man, it's not looking good. And I feel like anytime any one of these events occurs, I'm holding my breath a little bit, just hoping that Trump and the hawks surrounding him don't end up pushing a button you can't unpush. The US and Japan had a pretty immediate reaction to that, and as they're looking for UN embargoes on all oil exports to North Korea. North Korea doesn't have a whole lot of oil or really ability to create energy anyways, and so I'm sure this would really reduce the amount of energy that, the North Koreans could use. It's probably gonna, target the civilians and the, kingdom, or, Kim Jong-un, the leader there, Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, is gonna direct it all towards, his elites and the military. And at the same time, we're going to have the United States probably carrying out acts of, shows of force against North Korea. They're flying B-1 bombers over South Korea or test launching Minuteman missiles into the Pacific Ocean. Either way, what the North Korean people are going to see is that, America is threatening and America is cutting our fuel. And I think that's going to, make them less likely to direct their anger and hostilities towards the regime, and more likely to be willing to continue with the sacrifice and, fight against the Americans, because the big fear is that they'll come and take the North Koreans over. I'm not sure if that oil embargo will pass. I'm guessing that the rest of the world is taking this pretty seriously as well. I don't think anybody wants North Korea to act any more irrationally, and this might be a way even China or Russia agree to. The South Koreans responded by carrying out a simulation missile attack, which would be a decapitation strike on the North Korean leadership. In some sense, this doesn't seem to be all that much different than what North Korea did, kind of just retaliation for it. And so it's kind of funny how one will always end up kind of just being a byline and not really important. Nobody ever analyzes what the South Korean missile simulation was or anything like that, but they're going to overanalyze the North Korean missile test. Nikki Haley called the missile test unacceptable and irresponsible, and then went on to say no country should have to live under missiles being shot over them. Now, the first part is, why I had spected out Nikki Haley, and honestly, I'm happy it wasn't a little bit more hawkish, but the second part is what really caught me, where she's complaining about countries having missiles shot over their heads. Of course, the Yemeni people have pretty much lived under constant armed planes for the past 15 or 16 years. Like I said, I've talked about this before, but there's kids in Yemen who have developed PTSD just from hearing these drones overhead all the time. They said in the psychiatry offices at times, like, even just turning on a fan would sound so much like the hum of the drone, it would set these kids off and have them respond in anger. And of course, you have Trump actually launching missiles over, the land of Syria and killing some Syrian civilians there, and Nikki Haley was in favor of those missiles. And so it just amazes me that somebody could be so obviously hypocritical. You would think Nikki Haley could catch herself from saying something so stupid, but obviously she can't. And maybe if she did have that ability, she would be smart enough not to think both things at different times. Trump responded by saying that all options are on the table, this seeming to be a real threat to North Korea that, hey, if we want to, we can nuke you and invade you and try to take you over. And so that's kind of where we stand 2 days after the ballistic missile test. The Trump administration doesn't seem to be coming out quite as hawkishly as I expected them to. I expected that every single member of the Trump administration, McMaster, Dunford, Mattis, Tillerson, would all kind of come out and do their little song and dance and condemn North Korea and all say, well, there's a nuclear option on the table. But that didn't happen. And even Trump's statement wasn't as hawkish as I expected it to be. And so I think we could all breathe easy again. I don't think this is probably, going to be what sets off the, nuclear war between the United States and North Korea, should one ever happen. But again, step in the wrong direction. It's a shame that neither side here can just kind of realize that we're moving closer and closer to an endpoint that nobody wants. A few stories on the Iran nuclear deal. Nikki Haley demanded that the United States inspect all of Iran's military and non-military sites to see if they're violating the nuclear weapons deal. Iran, of course, said, we're not going to allow that. I think the U.S. could, if they have some kind of proof, according to the deal, they could file an actual request with the IAEA to look at Iran's military sites, and then Iran could either refuse or allow it, and, they go from there as far as arbitrating it goes. But I don't think that Haley took any official steps towards an investigation, just empty rhetoric. John Bolton released his plan that he apparently wrote for Steve Bannon, but since Bannon was gone from the White House, I guess he figured the most effective way, or the most likely way that his plan gets used, if he just publishes it in the open. Bolton's plan calls for basically a worldwide propaganda effort in order to convince everybody that Iran is cheating on the nuclear deal, even though the IAEA continues to look at the deal and say that it's a good deal and Iran's following it. The IAEA, of course, is the agency that's tasked with monitoring that other countries are following the non-proliferation treaty and then keeping with the nuclear weapons limits that are put in place in that treaty. Iran, of course, the P5+1 nuclear deal that was passed under Obama. The P5+1 deal puts Iran in a unique situation for the non-proliferation treaty, as they have additional inspections on their nuclear energy program that other countries who do not have nuclear weapons do not have. So they would undergo more strict inspections than, let's say, a Saudi Arabia or a South Africa. And so Bolton's plan is basically just to lie to everybody to make it sound like a truth, like Saddam has nuclear weapons or something like that. It's absolutely disgraceful and shameful. And thankfully we have Rand Paul, who said that absolutely I will in no way allow John Bolton to be a part of the administration. We also have some members of the U.S. intelligence community, and I guess I should preface this story by saying that this was, I believe, in the New York Times And it was all anonymous sources, and so, you kind of gotta take these things for what they, are. We've had a lot of times that these mainstream news agencies, and I've been very critical of them, publishing fake news, and so I don't want to go ahead and, just say that this is absolutely true, but it does seem that this story lined up pretty well to me. And as the intelligence community felt the administration was leaning on them to produce some kind of evidence that Iran was violating the nuclear weapons deal. And of course, Trump has ordered, I believe, Rex Tillerson to find a way out of the deal. So, it seems pretty out in the open that this is going on. But the intelligence community is saying that is disturbing just in case they actually follow through and invent some evidence. Of course, the P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran is very similar to the agreed framework that was put in place under Clinton with North Korea, and it was Bush's withdrawing from that led to the situation that we have today. And so it would be a real shame if we had the P5+1 deal put in place under Obama and then Trump withdrawing from it. And in the next administration, we're dealing with a nuclear-armed Iran rather than just an Iran with a enhanced inspection nuclear energy program. A few stories out of Afghanistan. We have 16 civilians killed by a NATO airstrike. I'm not sure if that was a U.S. airstrike or from another NATO country. Again, initial reports said that these were militants that were killed by the airstrikes, but it looks like several women and children were actually killed in the strike. We have an ISIS suicide bombing being carried out in Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan, killing 5 people. I believe this suicide bombing occurred in an area where there were some Americans in the general area, but it doesn't look like, I don't think any of them were hurt in the attack. We also have 10 killed in a terror attack in Helmand. I believe this one was carried out by the Taliban, and it looks like, again, some Afghan security forces were targeted. We have an ISIS enclave that existed on the Lebanon-Syrian border, surrendering to Hezbollah and the Lebanese army. I believe there were about 600 people, fighters and families included, that surrendered. And we also have the Intercept talking about just civilian deaths in Raqqa and how the United States is just killing civilians everywhere. Over, I believe, 400 now have been killed in Raqqa. And this is just the ones that are well documented enough to be reported on and identified. A lot of people are just dying for no reason. We have several families being wiped out completely by U.S. airstrikes. I don't mean family as in like a nuclear family. I mean like extended family. We have 16, 17, 18 members of a single family dying in a single airstrike, all the way from grandparents to grandchildren. And we also have the additional problem that the U.S. is killing anybody that's trying to flee Raqqa. And so you're ending up in a situation where there's a lot of times that the people have no way out either. And they're just absolutely screwed in every way. We have Brett McGurk, who is a White House envoy, saying that Idlib is the largest terrorist safe haven since 9/11. Probably a true statement, probably partly Assad's fault, because that's where he's been sending all the Syrian rebels that he surrounds in other areas of Syria. However, it was the United States that armed and empowered all these rebel groups. And so it's really a shame McGirt didn't have the integrity to point out that the United States was a large contributor in creating that situation and how leaving would help. U.S. forces in northern Syria were attacked by Turkish-backed rebels. Of course, the United States has special forces driving around in Humvees with huge American flags on the backs, trying to prevent any conflict between the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces and the formerly CI-backed, now Turkish-backed Syrian rebels in northern Syria. And, we could have a situation where right now we have special operations soldiers being fired upon by weapons that the CIA gave to Syrian terrorists. Got some news on what happened in Tel Afar. If you listened to the last show, I had talked about how I thought the invasion went fairly quickly, and it looks like ISIS actually abandoned Tel Afar. There was an estimated 2,000 ISIS fighters in Tel Afar, and I think most of them fled to the surrounding villages, and so now there's some very intense fighting going on in the surrounding villages. I'm assuming that ISIS assumed this was some sort of strategic advantage. I'm not sure why it would have happened. And we have Israel telling Russia that if Iran continues to extend their reach in Syria, that Israel will carry out a strike on the Assad palace in Damascus. Very hawkish. Hopefully it's just empty rhetoric, but man, is that scary, because that could really break out a big war. Quick story from Yemen. We have, after a round of fighting where 3 died, the Houthis and the former Yemeni President Saleh, who is the commander of a large part of Yemenis armed forces reaffirm their alliance, and so it looks like that the situation in Yemen is going to stay status quo. I had said that there was some concern about possibly that alliance falling apart. And in Myanmar, we have 100 killed in fighting between the current government and a Islamic militant group. All right, everybody, that'll wrap up the show for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find the podcast at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. My Facebook page is Kyle's Files, spelled KYLESFYLES. I have a private Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. My Twitter handle is at KYAAALE. The name of my website is kylesfilesblog.com, and I blog at thelibertarianinstitute.org.